Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through road texture tool. Okay, so let's go to helpers, Symbolium, Cityscape Pro, create a helper, name it. Okay, we pick our surface. As usual, we pick our curved area. We pick our second curved area. In the second curved area, we can set it to low poly. So the curve is, because it's not very close to camera, so we can just save some polygons. And let's generate. Okay. Have a good start. Now let's keep adding the hardscape areas. This is our sidewalk. Pavement. Wood board. Okay, so now let's go to road texture tool. Road texture tool creates a vector road texture that allows you to create a complex road materials with road markings, road wear, dust, snow. To start, we can click enable mapping. It asks you, do you want to automatically create a road material? We can say yes. Remember, road texture in this window only controls a diffuse map of the road. The material setup is a separate process. Once the material is created, the road texture from here will be instanced through the created material. So let's click OK. It gives you three options: road dry, road wet, or road winter. In our case, let's just pick the road dry. Double click. Okay. It has created a material for the surface object. Let's look at that material. Okay, this is a road material, and it has a diffuse map, which consists of regular 3ds Max composite map, which has composite layers. Road texture tool controls composite map automatically. It lists the existing layer in your composite map and lets you create spline masks automatically. Let's demonstrate that. So again, this is our composite map that is instanced in the diffuse channel of our road material that was created automatically when we loaded material. And we have our layers, our base layers, asphalt dry. Then comes yellow paint, white paint 2, and road dust at the end. Okay, so since we enabled the mapping in road texture, we have to generate result in order to set up mapping and everything else. The button has started flashing, so let's do that. Okay, and now let's test render and see what we have. So let's start setting up the road markings. We have layers. Every time you select one layer, there's a menu at the bottom that can be modified. So we can see that the texture for that layer is just a yellow paint. It has opacity of 100 that can be modified. We have a mask, which is, in our case, it's completely black, which means that the layer won't be visible. But we have an option to choose a spline mask template. In our spline mask template, we have a couple of options. We have single line, double line, dashed line 3 meters, dashed line 2 meters, dashed custom, where we can specify the length of the line segment and the length of the gap, crosswalk, fill closed shape, distance, which is a distance gradient from a spline. It is useful for creating dust lines or road wear lines. Autodust. Autodust is a very useful tool. It analyzes the whole scene and automatically creates dust lines. I will walk you through that later. So in our case, we just want yellow paint, double line. And once we specify the spline mask template, then we have to choose a spline. Pick shape. Choose this spline here, which is already called double line. We have to generate. Let's render. Now you can see that the double line has been created. Next, we can use a white paint layer, and we can go to spline mask template and choose dashed line, let's say 2 meter. And we can pick this spline, we can generate, and you can see that it has already created dashed line on a frozen Cityscape assets layer. Cityscape takes your original spline, processes it, and puts it on a Cityscape assets layer. You can see the dashed line. Now, if you noticed, the the segments are not really curving in sharp turns. We can fix that. Instead of dashed line 2 meters, we can choose dashed custom. We have outline width, which is 0.1 meters by default. We have line length, let's do it 2 meters. And we have gap length, let's do it 2 meters as well. If we want the segments to be curved at tight turns, we check the curved line. We generate again and test render. Okay, so now you can see that the segments are curving a little bit in tight corners. It takes a little bit more time to calculate those kinds of dashed lines, but might be worth it if you have a close-up view like that. Okay, let's go back. You can still see that even though you have your road textures, you have something is still not there. Something is missing, and that something might be road wear and road dust. So to quickly simulate a road dust, to easily simulate that, we need to go to our Cityscape, and you can notice that we have a road dust layer ready. All we have to do is to go down to Spline Mask template and choose the Autodust. Autodust will analyze the whole cityscape elements, and will pick all the splines that can accumulate dust. You have the layer opacity. This is something you can control. You can set it to 100, or maybe in this case, let's do a 50. Let's generate, and now we can see what we're getting. Okay, now the roads are starting to look realistic. You can see that there's a dust gradient coming from each line. We can control the amount, distance, and we can control the opacity of the dust layer as well. The Autodust also automatically picks the curved area spline and accumulates dust around it as well. So next thing we can do is to open the material library, and we can quickly just randomly load to all elements toolbar. We can load the template dry. Do you want to override the current materials with that template? Yes, I want. So it just randomly scatters the templates. Next thing we can do to make it look a little nicer is to go to Supergrass. We can take curved area. I think our curved area has grass material. Let's enable Supergrass on curved area, which is our grass. Let's click enable, load the Supergrass. That's it. Next thing we want to do is to take that empty white paint texture. Let's create a crosswalk. We go to Spline Mask template, we'll go to crosswalk, and we'll pick a spline. We already have pre-made splines for crosswalks. Pick it. We specify the crosswalk width, which is 3 meters. In this case, the button has started flashing, so we can just generate result. Okay, now it's a good time to test it. Okay, so it's starting to look like a decent road. So as you noticed, that area here didn't have any lines, so just because the Autodust is looking for existing lines in order to generate the dust around them, that area looks a little bit empty. So what we can do is we can create additional splines to simulate some dust. We can do something like that. Okay, I think that should be good enough. Okay, so let's call this distance. Let's pick this into Cityscape. Actually, we need to create additional dust layer. In order to create a new texture layer, we just click the Add New Layer button, and we have a collection of textures. These are not materials. These are just maps, just textures, 2D textures. So in this case, we just want the road dust texture, which is this one. We select road dust, look at this Spline Mask template. We can pick a distance, and we pick the spline that we just created. Button is flashing, so we can generate it. And let's see how that looks. By the way, before we do that, let's go to distance. So our distance is 1.5 meters, and our opacity is 100. So let's make it maybe 60. Should do it. Okay, it feels like those lines are a little too narrow. The areas were large, so we probably have to make it wider and also reduce the opacity just to blend it better. If we make the opacity 30, and if we extend the distance to 3 meters, I think that should do the job. I think that looks much better. It just gives you a subtle variation, just enough to make it look realistic. We can explore the fill closed shape spline template. So let's just create some closed shape here. We can make a rectangle. We can make shape like that. Let's experiment with those shapes. Okay, so we have distance texture. So let's add a new layer. We have lots of textures here. These are asphalts. Then comes paints. We have oil marks, road dust. And then we have the pavements. These pavements are very similar to what we have in our material library, but these are just textures, just diffuse maps. Let's create a pavement 5 texture. Just double click. Let's pick fill closed spline. We pick this spline that we just created. We can name the spline properly. Okay. And for the next layer, let's do something like a red paint. And let's do fill closed shape and pick the spline object here. Okay, so we have to generate. Let's see what we have. So you can see that this is our pavement that was selected on our road surface, and that's our red paint. Now we can create very custom and unique patterns with the road tool. Actually, it's way more efficient to create difficult, complex line work in road texture because it's very lightweight. It doesn't generate any additional geometry, so it can handle very, very heavy line work without any problem, and it won't compromise render time at all. So it doesn't matter how complex it is. We can just create another layer. Let's make it black, and let's choose a single line. Now let's pick that newly created random shape. Now the 0.1 width is typical for road markings, but in our case we want some thin line work, so let's do 0.02 maybe. Let's make it 50% opacity. We have to generate every time we add a new geometry or layer. Okay, so you can see the line work that we just created is actually, it was very rough. I'm sure it can do better than that, but it gives you an idea how custom tiles or custom patterns can be created with additional layers. Now let's create some additional pavement markings like arrows. Cityscape Pro comes with a spline presets. If we go to create panel, splines, and we go down to Cityscape, we have all kinds of arrows, cyclist, preferential sign, and handicapped. And we demonstrate. We have arrow up. We have arrow left, arrow up and left, which we can mirror if we want to. We can do a cyclist sign. We can do a preferential sign and handicapped sign. Now these are all closed splines, so in order to use them in Cityscape Pro, you have to attach all of them together if it's just one paint, and you can just attach them together as long as it's one paint and use it as a fill closed spline mask template. So let's do that. Let's create a bike lane. So it would be this way probably. Just do 4 here. Or here. And you can copy some of those lines, some of those arrows here. So let's copy this arrow here. Have a handicapped sign somewhere here. That would probably be a parking. So anyways, this is something that happens per site plan. So you can just arrange those markings around the site. And the important thing is to attach all of them together, or at least the ones that have the same paint. Like if the ones, part of the arrows are yellow and part of them are white, the white ones have to be attached together and the yellow ones have to be attached as a separate object. In this case, let's make it simple. Let's just attach. Let's just make everything white. So just convert it to edit spline. We attach multiple, select all of them. Okay, and now it's a single spline. And we call it markings. Okay, so let's, our layers, we add a new layer. Let's make it white paint. Let's pick the fill close shape, fill close spline, and let's pick the marking spline. Obviously we have to generate. And now let's look at the result. We can see our arrows. Now one thing that comes in mind is that the cyclist lane typically has either green paint underneath or red paint depending on the city. Let's make an underlying color. So let's stop this for a second. So we can reuse our dashed line spline. We can detach this one as a copy, sorry. We detach bike line, and then we just offset the line inside. And again, we use the fill close spline. We add a layer. We need it's either red or green. Let's make red this time. Let's pick the fill close shape. Let's pick the spline. Now it feels like those cyclist markings should be in the center. This one should be a little bit angled. Oops. A little bit angled. Now I can see that when I move the original splines, there's a additional spline that Cityscape created on its own frozen Cityscape assets layer that happens every time you generate a spline. Let's move those in the middle as well. Generate again. And now that we generated, everything is in the center. So let's see how it looks. Okay, we made a mistake. The paint texture is sitting on top of cyclist markings. That's why the cyclists are not visible, which is very easy to fix actually. We take the red paint that we just created. You can actually see the mask that it was generated, and we just move it up. You can also name the layers. Obviously, this is a spline mask. This is a spline that was chosen, and it gives you information that it's a marking spline, but you don't really see that in the list. So you can rename the layer, call it markings and white paint. Again, there's no need to generate in this case because the button is not flashing. Moving layers up and down doesn't need any generation. So we can render again. Okay, this is looking better. So basically, Road Texture Tool allows you to create very complex site. You can do road textures that are much larger than that, what you see here. You have the layers. Every time you create a new layer, library comes up. But you can also load the existing layers. If you select any layer, and if you click the texture library, the same library comes up, and then you can just load another texture and the name will change automatically as well. You can select the spline and the scene, which is typical of the whole Cityscape interface. If you select all splines, it will select splines that were picked in road texture as well. And now I want to demonstrate other use of road texture, which doesn't end on roads. So there are cases when you have a very complex patterns on your pavement areas, which is something that's not practical to do by geometry. Either the lines are too thin or the splines might be too heavy. For that reason, create additional Cityscape Pro. One that's only responsible for specific pavement area. So let's create a road texture for this beige area. So now that we have a second cityscape object, we can call it pavement area beige. And in this cityscape, we only need to generate additional road texture. We don't need anything else because everything else is being controlled by the main site cityscape object. So for that, we need to pick the same surface as the original cityscape has. Multiple cityscapes can share same surface object without any problem. Okay, we only need the road texture, so we can hide everything else and click Enable Mapping. Now, if you noticed, when I enabled mapping, it didn't give me an option to load a road material to surface, because the second cityscape knows that the surface object and the road material is being controlled by the main site cityscape because it was created first. So in this case, road texture can be used to control additional composite map. For that, we go to Site, we pick the curved area texture, and let's just refresh the memory of which ID is this. We can either look at the list or other ways to just select the polygon and identify, oh, it's ID number 4. So obviously it's going to be ID 4 in multi-sub object material as well, which is this, the pavement O2 dry. So in the diffuse map of this pavement material, we already have a composite map because all materials that come in Cityscape library use a composite map as a diffuse texture. The main reason for that is that it just gives you extra flexibility to quickly add layers. So all we need to do here is to instance composite map in our beige material into our second Cityscape. So we just take composite map from here, drag it, put it here. And it's very important to make it instance and not copy. If we make copy, any further changes made in the Cityscape interface won't be reflected in our material. So let's make it instance. Click OK. And one other thing we have to do is to click this refresh layer button, because if we instance materials directly, the list is not being updated. So we just click the refresh and you can see that it has loaded the pavement O2 layer. Okay, so now we can keep adding new layers. Let's add a new layer and let's make it black. And again, you can see that when I added a layer here, it automatically added here as well. The funny thing here is that the list order is reversed on composite layers versus list. So the second layer is here at the top, something that we can get used to. So let's just create some kind of interesting pattern. Let's make triangles, maybe. Now let's select similar, and I wish I had the transfer randomizer script installed to make it a lot easier. But again, at least this will give you an idea. Now let's pick one of them and let's attach all the rest to it. And we have our black texture edit already, and let's pick the single line and let's make it 0.03. And let's pick our lines, which should be actually called triangles. Okay. Again, we need to generate the result, but the generated result will only affect this texture. This Cityscape has no connection to the main site. Okay, and now let's see what we have here. You can see the triangles. And now let's just fill it with a little bit of texture. We can reuse the same spline. We can add a new type of pavement. It can be, which one? Maybe this dark one. And in this case, we can do the fill close spline. and pick the same spline that we picked for the black lines. Now, these lines are self-intersecting and it will give us some weird results, but in this case, it's just for demonstration purposes. So we can go ahead and see what happens. But typically, you don't want your splines to be self-intersecting because it might give you wrong alpha channels. So let's generate. Let's see. It looks interesting. Now, what I want to do is that you can see that the both textures are at the same angle. I want to rotate the dark one a little bit, which we can do manually. So again, you can see our layers are duplicated here. So we're loading templates, but you're more than welcome to actually go deeper and modify the actual texture. I wouldn't touch the masks though. I wouldn't change the order of those layers because that might mess up the settings, but you're more than welcome to go into the texture itself and just tweak settings. So the easiest way to tweak angle is to just rotate W and let's write maybe 30 degrees here. Other thing I want to do is to move that single line, the black line, on top of the pavement. I want to make it thicker, 0.1 maybe. I want to make it dashed custom, 0.3 and 0.3 maybe. And I also want to change the texture to white paint. Okay, we have to generate because it's flashing. Let's see what we're getting. Okay, we have a very interesting result here. So you can see that the dark texture is rotated a little bit and our dashed line is sitting on top of the texture. So this doesn't make much sense right now, but you can create very interesting patterns like that. And you actually have unlimited amount of layers in your road texture. Okay. So the last thing we have to do here to finish this side up is to create the curb cuts near the crosswalks, which is very easy to do. We just do one spline. Just start copying it over. Let's call it curb cut. Let's take it into our main cityscape, the one that's controlling everything in the curved areas. I'll pick the curb cut. We generate. And we have our nice curb cuts here. Perfect. And we do the rendering of the overall site. Okay. So the last thing we can discuss here is that every time you enable mapping in your road texture, the Cityscape surface modifier gets applied to your surface object the same way it did for the modify surface toolbar. The main difference is that in this case, Cityscape surface is only used for mapping information. It keeps two channels. First contains real-world mapping, and the second channel contains the overall mapping of the surface object, the one that is used for mapping the vector alpha channel that's generated by Cityscape. The same thing happens to curved area. Curved area now contains two mapping channels. The first mapping channel is for real-world mapping for textures, and the second one is for vector alpha maps generated by Cityscape. So the moment you enable the road texture, you don't need to worry about mapping of the surface at all.